Welcome to the Porn Sacrifice channel. This is episode 19 of the 924S Turbo build. Apologies for those that are following this series. I've been offline for a little bit, partly work and then partly away for the weekend and mountain biking, and then managing to slice my finger open. A couple of stitches, there's a big old thing on there which has now come off. Hopefully these will be coming out. Still smarts a little, so I have to see how I get on. I'd like to say it was something heroic and manly, but actually I managed to completely slice my finger open with a penknife while I was making myself lunch. So not mountain biking, but a picnicking incident. Anyway, looking forward to getting back on with the car. This week I need to look at the oil cooler setup, essentially the way that the 1.8T is configured. It points the oil filter into the side, so that needs relocating. So I'm also going to do the oil cooler at the same time and just move everything around a little bit. So I need to see how that's going to all fit. So this is the problem. When that fits on there, then the filter coming off the bottom, just basically there isn't room for it. So that needs to be moved around. This setup, wherever it fits, isn't going to work for us. So I need to essentially use this, and then there's a takeoff which fits on top. So these are basically to replicate a oil filter, but instead of the filter screwing on, there's just hoses that come out of there. Just the standard rubber seal, so that fits nicely. And then essentially that will run to a oil filter, remote oil filter housing, which basically just like that. So then I have actually got an oversized filter, so that'll bolt on there. And then from there I am going to take it to this oil cooler. Essentially that I think will feed in or out either way, and it's got the special mounting brackets there that have just got rubber on them to dampen the vibrations through. So that's all looking good, and then some hosing to go with it, which will just go on to these speed fittings. So they just essentially push onto there, and then obviously that bolts on to the various parts. Okay, I have actually cleaned this up before a little bit with chemicals and whatnot. It's still a bit scrappy, so now that I've got the blast coming up, I'm going to give it a quick once over, see if I can tidy it up, get it looking nice and pretty. So that's the finished product, looking a lot nicer than it was before. What I'm going to do now is just blast air through all of these holes just to make sure it gets all of the media out, the glass shot. But despite the fact that I'm probably getting a mess all over it again, this is all nice and clean. So essentially the bolt tube thingamajig went into there, and then all the way through the cooler, which was on top, and then into the filter. So I need to cut this down because I don't need that section. So what I do need to do is just get the heights, or work out how long I need to make this. That's what I'll do. Just use the bolt there. So that is. About 12 mil. 15 and a half. 27.5. Okay, now it's time to check this for fit. I'll be honest, I damaged the threads a little earlier, but it seems to be going on okay now. Actually, maybe not this. There we go. On. So, it's on. So the reason for setting this up, obviously it needs to be done, but it's also important for me to get this roughly in place or get this bolted onto the side of the engine so that I can see where the hoses are going to be coming out exactly. Hopefully I'm not going to be needing to get right angle ones of these, having spent what I have on them, but I'll try this on the engine now. Right then, I've got this now to fit. Basically the oil filter takeoff. The brake booster is in for positioning, and as is the oil cooler mount, or the original oil cooler mount. So I need to now find a place for this. I am going to need to create something, or just cut something and drill it so there's a bit of a standoff there, because this is an oversized filter, which is quite common with these engines, just to add a bit of extra oil capacity and cooling. Unfortunately, because of the way that this is going, and because of where the and I need to check which is in and out, because of where these go here, I need to try and bring this as far forward as possible, so I think probably about there, and I may still need some right angle fittings. Mark this off roughly. I've got my little adapter plate is made, and to attach this to the body I'm actually going to use rivnuts. I've never used rivnuts before, and A, I want to make sure that I don't make any mistakes, and B, I like to know how things work. So if you're like me and are new to the world of rivnutting, then I'm just going to run through on here, see exactly what's happening, and if you're all about rivnuts, then you might want to skip forward or maybe have a laugh at my understanding. So that's the little sucker. This is the tool used for putting them in, and yeah, so I'm going to start by just drilling a hole, and then we'll have a look and see what actually happens with these. That is a rivnut insert thingamajig, and that is the hole that I've drilled that it fits through. So having opened the tool up, screwed the nut on, stick him in this little hole, and then squeeze. Maybe give it a little twist. Unscrew, and that's now something securely tightened in the metal. You saw essentially the surface collapsed one side against the other, and that's now ready to hold a bolt. So I'm just going to use the spacer now to get everything positioned in here. I've got the centres between the holes measured off of there, and I'm just going to use the level. There's a hole already in the side there which I'm going to drill out, and okay, moving along. So that's the oil cooler takeoff plate on, although it's not on there now. The remote oil filter, and following the direction of travel, I now need to go to the front and do the actual oil cooler itself, which I'm going to mount in front of the intercooler. I just need to see how that's going to go. So thinking is I can just pop some holes in there and use the rivnuts. I'll extend that out to there. I've got an old piece which I'll use, and then I'll just make a bracket which will come off sort of pretty much I think across sort of up there and then across, and it will cover that whole section. So I just need to get that marked out. Okay, there we have my initial cutout, subject to being tidied up, and the way that will work is some of this is going to be cut away for what's already there and then welded to the existing. Essentially it's going to fit like that, and then on the back stacking the, I know it always looks a bit odd doing this, but essentially the air is going to pass through the oil cooler, through the intercooler, and then through the radiator. So that's, you know, it's designed for airflow, and that's why it's okay to, or that's why it's fairly common actually for these to be stacked on top of each other. So what I'm going to do now is, where this is still a bit flexy, so that some of this section is going to be cut out and welded, and then welded onto the end of the existing bit there, but I'm just going to roll the edges ever so slightly to give it a bit more strength to support this section. Okay, right, so that's all hammered. It's obviously not ideal, but for where it's going to go, it does the job. So yeah, that folds forward. Obviously I can rivnut the bottom ones. The top, however, I am going to have to figure out something to do to bolt that into place, just because it's going to have the intercooler behind it, so I can't therefore have any bolts or anything on the back, so I'm going to have to basically just get something welded on there so that I can get that bolted into place. so they are now bolted through. I did a little test there and they all stuck a little bit on, so they're obviously very tight. I probably shouldn't have put or needn't have put any welds around the inside, but they're a bit of a mess, or because they're now a bit of a mess. But with the back, I'm going to leave well enough alone, but what I will do is just run a strip of protective tape across the back there. Obviously not to protect this, but to protect the intercooler. And yeah, once this is all finally ready to be welded in, or before it's finally ready to be welded in, I'm just going to run around and tidy up the inside of this, just neaten up the edges and everything. But right now it's time for food, and I will catch you in a little while. Right, so with the riv nuts in place, I think I'm going to need to modify the bottom of the bracket slightly to get it to fit. But actually where that's bolted in, it does feel really nice and sturdy. So I think I might just have it so that it bolts in. I may look at just putting one other in. I'll see how it goes as it is. This is certainly going to make it more sturdy, and that's bolted nicely to the bottom of the bracket. What I will do is, ideally I'd have something a bit padded, but I am just going to run some tape across this just so that it doesn't, the metal on metal isn't going to damage the intercooler. The way it's mounted on the bottom, it's nice and sturdy. There is a bit of movement, so all I'm going to do is just bend this over, drill it, and create an L bracket which will bolt through one of the existing holes there. Right, there we go. A relatively quick job done, I think. Took me slightly longer than expected. With the filming, to be honest, I kept stopping every now and again so I could listen to what's going on in the Cricket World Cup. I'm not too sure about copyright, so I don't want to keep that running. That aside, oil cooler setup is now in. So I've got the takeoff plate, the Mercoil takeoff plate to the remote oil filter housing, and then down to the oil cooler in the front. The bracket that's supposed to hold it in, which certainly wasn't cheap for what it is. I thought I'd get the right thing and do it properly, but the fitment was horrible. But anyway, you saw some of that. I suspect I'll leave it in, so there we go. But yeah, keen to carry on now, and hopefully I want to try and start getting some jobs done in the evening. As usual, I'm not sure what to go with next. If it's going to be evening work, then it's going to be dictated by how noisy I can be. So we'll see. Anyway, as usual, thank you for watching, and hopefully catch you next time. And sooner than the last was. Cheers.